Welcome to the Kez Says podcast. I'm Kez. Join me for stories, songs, and memories. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Kez Says podcast. Let's cover my living places as a San Diego native. So I got, apartments in San Diego around Claremont. My mom and dad are coming out of Coronado. He was in the Navy. Then they, had the baby. That would be me. And then we had my sister was about 4.5 and always is 4.5 years older than me. And then when we went up to Ramona, I remember going like, whoa, as a kid, like we were looking at this house for sale. And, I didn't understand the whole thing of, renting or buying, because you're just a kid. It's like whatever your parents are doing with their job and their money. It's just, here I go. I'm moving to a new place. But I remember looking at that house in Ramona, just going like, whoa, it had a pool and this little sailboat on it. It was all crystal blue and it just looked so good. I just wanted to jump in then when we went and looked at it. Because I'm pretty sure it was in the summertime, after school. Because I know we didn't consider buying or moving while I was in school. It was like on summer break. So moved up to Ramona there in 67 and then went and stayed there all the way up till my freshman year, which would have been 73 into 74. And then my parents were going through their divorce, and so they shipped me off back to Missouri. So I left Ramona for, whatever that was, a half a year or something to go back. I remember the season I went back in the fall and I lived through the winter. Then the spring came, and then when school got out in the summer, then I came back to Ramona. And then, my mom was living in the house. My dad got moved out with someone else. And then, so I was there for another while, and then I met Stan Cody. I had a year there where we were friends and did whatever. And then, when I first met him, his mom had breast cancer, and I never really met his mom, but I knew she was in the room in the back where her and Avon stayed, and then that was his stepdad, Avon Schoenberg. And then when she died, it kind of like, Stan went through the grieving process. I don't know, I didn't really. Also noting that I may have been back in Missouri during that time. Whatever, so I don't really remember being involved, except I remember it happened. And then later on, somehow Stan and I's friendship sparked up. And then we got a little more serious, like he would spend the night at my house and we would go do things. And so this great story that has the most significance in understanding the brilliance of who Stan is and what he knows is, I remember this one time, we're like 14 going on 15. And Stan's neighbor, he lived up there at the top of 8th Street and with Joe, his brother, and then of course their stepdad, Avon. And the neighbor had put out a TV into the trash, and so he spotted it, and I think I helped him carry it. We carried it into his garage, and then he started taking it apart. He took out the TV's amplifier and the speaker, and then he soldered in a jack and had this little plastic speaker thing from something else, like a piece of a cheap stereo or something. And then he, soldered on a little 9-volt battery thing, and then he, put on the guitar input jack, which would have been, probably the input from the receiver from the TV, the tuner. And then, of course, the power probably came from a transformer, which would have toned the power down because this little amp didn't get very loud, didn't have a big speaker. So anyway, Stan puts it all together and then puts on a battery, and we plug in a guitar, and he freaking made this guitar amp. Portable guitar amp run off 9-volt ladder off of an old TV set someone was throwing away. And I'm just, wow. My mind, I learned so much from watching him about signal flow. And, he made a little chart when I didn't get my guitar until my 15th birthday. And so, I said, hey, I got a guitar. And then he made me a chart, showing me where to put my fingers on the neck and how to do a scale. And, that's just it. I mean, the rest of my life is based off of I learned the guitar from that one piece of paper he gave me. Somebody else would show me stuff, and that's how you learn. You were passing information back and forth about how to play songs and stuff. So he, after a little bit of time, moved up to his dad's and started going to high school up in Palo Alto. Doug Jones was in the same grade. He was the ASB president that year of our sophomore year. didn't really know him then, but we were both kids of divorced parents. And so we were what they would call the latchkey kids, right? You know, no mom, no dad really looking out after us. And we had all this freedom, you know, to get in trouble, which we did. And so I remember he got some money, and then I asked my grandpa for some money. My grandma had died earlier, and then he moved up in the house. Originally it was his money, I think, to put the down payment on the house in Ramona, and so it was more my mom and grandpa's house. You know, after the divorce, my dad just went on and did his own thing. But yeah, so we bought Greyhound bus tickets. I remember Roger Swift gave us a ride to the bus depot. I can't even think of where it was. It must have been Escondido. But so I took my albums. By this time I had like pretty much almost a full milk crate full, you know, on its side, whatever that was. And I just, you know, couldn't leave those behind, I guess, because I don't remember taking a record player. I just took the albums. And so the bus driver's looking at me like, dude, you can't bring a milk crate full of record albums, you know, because they did have the underneath the bus department where people were putting suitcases, or, I mean, back then there wasn't really many people using backpacks yet, but I don't know what Doug and I had, you know, did we have a plastic bag or something? I can't think of how we went up, you know, if we had, I think we might have had sleeping bags. But yeah, I knew I would have had one because of my parents, you know, being rock hounds and going on camping trips all the time. So couldn't go up on the bus with my album, so Roger Swift took him, and then he, you know, had him at his house that I ended up hooking up with him later to get him back. And when I did, I remember his favorite album was The Tubes, I think Young and Rich, because you could see he had played it over and over and over again. You know, when you play records, the black vinyl starts turning white, you know, from so many plays. It gets, like if you play one song in particular, you'll see that it starts graying out because the needle's kind of like carving or going over and over and over again on the track. But anyway, I just remember that going, yeah, Roger and the Tubes. I had the Tubes' first album plus their second album, Young and Rich, and that's the one he seemed to like. He liked some songs on there. But yeah, I just remember that very directly. So that means, you know, my San Diego experience from moving, you know, from city to city was Ramona back to Missouri, Missouri back to Ramona. Then my mom still has the house. When Doug and I get these bus tickets and we go up and we see Stan, we didn't really have a plan, but I don't know, that's what divorced weird kids do when they just think, yeah, let's just go up and hang out. And we did. We went up and we were sleeping in the park, and we were sleeping in alleyways, you know, where people had these little fenced areas where they put their trash cans, and then we would, you know, if there's only 3 trash cans but there was all this other room, we would lay out our sleeping bags and hang out. And then in the daytime we were going to school where Stan was, and I remember the principal or someone was always, he thought we were pesky and a nuisance, you know, always going like, why are you guys here, you know, and knowing the story that we're just like somehow youth at a high school that weren't registered to go there, but we're just hanging out, you know. And then we made some friends and did different things. Stan had a friend named Phil who was like this keyboard player, and then he started driving, you know. I was still 15. I don't know if Doug was older, but I think he turned 16 somewhere up there. And anyway, we got in this head-on car accident, and you know, we weren't wearing seatbelts, and we're all boosh up into the ceiling and going, oh, like having concussions or something, but you know, never going to the doctor or anything. Just anyway, there's so many stories about that trip. You know, it was only so many months, and so we got into some pretty big trouble. We both ended up in juvenile hall. And then juvenile hall, you know, after being in there a couple of weeks, you know, and they're running your records, like where you live, who are your parents, where are we taking you to? They fly us back down to San Diego, where Doug and my parents were. So from Ramona up to Palo Alto into juvenile hall down back to San Diego. You know, we're down in San Diego proper at some juvenile hall detention center, and then my dad shows up after I'm there too for another few days. I don't know how long it was, but nothing happened quickly in those days. It was like you got in, you got booked, and you're in a room or a bunk or whatever it is, and then, you know, you're just hoping to get out. But yeah, it took a while for my dad to show up. Not that I knew he was going to be quite honest. I don't know what was going on. I just felt like, yeah, I'm incarcerated. And then when he showed up, he had become a Christian, and he said, yeah, if you want to, come live with me, you're going to go to church 2 times a week and all this stuff. And I go, sure, anything's better than being in here. So then I went to Jamul. So from, that was my next place of living around San Diego. And Jamul, again, another rural area that's really undeveloped, just a lot of homes and dirt roads and ranches. And I remember I got a job there working at Simpson's Nursery, just watering plants. And that was pretty cool. I remember Steve Miller's Fly Like an Eagle album came out, and somehow there was another guy that worked there too, and he had like this Baja Bug, when they fixed him up, took a Volkswagen, pulled off some fenders, and had the cooling pack up on the back window and stuff. And so he had that, and then we would, on our breaks and stuff, he had that cassette or something, or 8-track probably in those days. And we were listening to Fly Like an Eagle to the sea. But yeah, those stuck in my head. Like, again, everything always had these musical connections, like, oh yeah. When I was up to Palo Alto with Stan, I met some friends, and we went down into San Francisco area. And I remember buying Thin Lizzy Jailbreak there, and somehow, I kept it with me through all that and ended up going home. And then, so later on, after I went to Jamul, pretty sure, it's so hard to remember all the details, because I went up there too one time with Tim McDonald. We took a road trip, and I'm going, was that before or after the Doug thing? Because we went up and stopped in LA and Bebop Deluxe, very clear memory of Sunburnt Finish. And I remember buying that album, because Tim had the first 2 albums, and I was really into listening to those. And so that I bought Sunburst Finish, and it was like, oh man, I loved every song on that album. I'd listen to it all the time. But anyway, somehow there was 2 different trips up to go see Stan. There was one with Tim McDonald, and one where Doug and I just took the bus up there and stayed a little longer. Tim and I's trip was probably just shorter. I remember, and he was living up at the Finley house, and that was a crazy story. And so I had never driven before, but yeah, they had me, anyway, I wrecked one of their cars because I was trying to go up the driveway, and I didn't understand about, let off on the gas and then push on the brake. It wasn't a clutch, so I didn't have to do that, but it was just a big old car with a motor, and then I somehow just went too fast and then turned over, and then I ended up bottoming it out on some granite rocks out in their front yard. Wow, I forgot about that. It just came to me right now. That was a terrible thing. And I remember Mrs. Finley, called my mom and said, yeah, trying to get money out of it. My mom said, I don't have any money. So that was sad that I did that. But at the same time, wow, what an experience. I can remember that. It was almost like a dream, like how you have I can remember having a dream when I'm a little kid. Seriously, like, this was in Bonita. I remember it was when I lived in Bonita. I had this dream about I'm driving a car through a forest, and how the headlights would only illuminate the area in front of you. And I'm driving it, and it was like, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, all bumpy. And I remember just being scared, like, I don't know how to drive the car, but I'm driving the car. And so it was kind of like that, up there. I'm 15, pretty sure, yep. And Tim had to go get his car fixed, or something happened, and so then he had borrowed their car, and it was at the bottom of the hill. And then he said, yeah, you drive this one and I'll drive that one, and follow me up. And then I'm all, he goes, you can do it. I'm all, oh, okay, like, just being stupid, like, it's simple, you step on the gas or whatever. Anyway, so I just remember there were so many things in your mind going on, like, oh, I gotta steer, following the road. And then I'm, not thinking about taking my foot off the gas, and I just started going faster and faster when I should have not. I think because I was trying to keep up with Tim, I go, look how fast he's going, I gotta go. But wow, that's just brand new to me. I haven't thought about that for many, many years. But now here it is, the confessions of the guy who didn't know how to drive. But anyway, that was at the very beginning, because we were getting his car fixed to go do this road trip, and so that's what I remember. And then we did the road trip, but during that time, which is why it's confusing, is that I turned 16, but I think I turned 16 out at my dad's house, And I ended up living with Vern Blanchard in these apartments down at El Cajon. So when you came down the hill from Ramona on 67, you would pass the Lakeside and Santee exits or whatever, and then you would go straight into Magnolia, which would just dump you into like the little downtown area of El Cajon. And there was some apartments just a couple blocks right when you came in. It's funny, they were apartments, but they reminded me of like a motel, right? Because you parked outside, you know, and then you just had the doors, you know, and you would have a key and you go in, and it was like a 2-bedroom apartment. And so I remember staying there, and so it must have been, and I have photos of Tim dropping me off, or we're coming home from the way back from visiting Stan, and that was where I lived, because we're parked out in front, and you can see Vern had a steam cleaning van that I used to work with him. That's how I ended up going down there and living in his apartment. It was a job, and I had dropped out of school, so that would have been in my year. But again, I came back down from the trouble I got into, so it had to have been before, and then Tim and I drove up after. Because I remember when I came down in Jamul, I was 15 still, and then I turned 16, and I know I was 16 in the apartment, you know, living with Vern. So Jamul, wow, a lot of stories there when I lived there. My meeting the guys from church, right? There was a couple guys, Cheech and Neil, Bruno, and then there were some girls too, and at school. And so then, wow, I can remember my dad, as he became a Christian, he had this, you know, the cabinets up above where you push a refrigerator in, and the built-in cabinets. And, you know, I would be snooping around when they were out doing whatever, and then I go, oh, they have all this alcohol, you know, and they don't drink anymore. So I started emptying the bottles, taking them to the school bus stop, and we would drink in the morning before we went to school when I'm like 16. And then I would be filling them back up with water, you know, and then eventually I went through them all. And I remember the last one was this really tall bottle. It was like Galliano, like a licorice liqueur, yellow. And so I think what I did was I ended up taking some of it and then watering it down so it still looked yellow. But I remember that was nasty, just going like, ugh, gave you a headache after we drank it, because it was just all sugary. You know, it was a liqueur. It wasn't really like drinking vodka or whatever the other stuff that we drank was. But that was really dumb, you know, being stupid and 16 and drinking, going to school and showing up all buzzed. And there was a couple girls involved that we met that we were friends with, so we had this little group, you know, that we would talk and do stuff. And you know, it was a trippy new school, Valhalla High School, where it was built around like a stadium, and then in the middle, you know, was the cafeteria and where everyone hung out. And then it was like multiple stories, and then the classrooms were all open, and they had some kind of acoustic baffling or something, but there was always this white noise all the time, you know, like, oh, like when you're in a mall or something, is what it reminded me of. And it was a school, it was a high school, so I remember playing water polo there. They had this new, like, excellent pool systems that were really cool. I remember, Greg Lucanis came out of there, the guy that got Olympic, along with the other negative story that associates with that. But yeah, that was pretty cool, going to Valhalla just for that. You know, when I came home with my dad, I don't think it was at the beginning of the school year, so same thing, I went there probably a partial. The reason I know that is because every time I went back to Ramona or high school, they always just were lost. It was like, you know, you're supposed to have credits or units or something, you know, to graduate, and they just say, yeah, you don't have anything, you know, because you were only here, you know, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, you know. I don't think, the only full year I had there was my sophomore year. All the other times it was just these little partial amounts, and then I was off somewhere else, you know, dropping out, doing something, or my parents were taking me out. So that was kind of a bummer. But Jamul, great experience, you know, all these different things that I did there with these different friends in the rural area. And then El Cajon with Vern Blanchard. And going over to the mall in El Cajon, there was a Warehouse Records, I remember. It's 16, this would have been 76. And I remember getting Billion Dollar Babies, which was the first album that came out from the Alice Cooper band members. And so Alice Cooper went solo, did Welcome to My Nightmare in 1975. And then, he came out with Alice Cooper Goes to Hell in 76. And I think 77 was...
the Lace and Whiskey album.
I think he had the Alice Cooper show after that, and then a live album. But anyway, long story short was I met Ron Jensen from high school, was working at Warehouse Records, when I'm like 16, living there in El Cajon with Vern Blanchard. So he must have been driving down and still going to high school up in Ramona. And Tim McDonald would know because he mentioned something about Ron also working at some other place down in Escondido. So he was cruising down and working at Warehouse Records, and I remember that was kind of the last time I probably ever talked to him was, hey, what do you think about this Billion Dollar Baby album? Well, what Alice Cooper sounded like, so it can't be that far back, whatever. I had that conversation, and now I still have that album, and it was okay. Not something I remember listening to a lot or over again. In fact, I couldn't even tell you what any of the songs are on the album. I should probably break it out just for the old time's sake and go, oh yeah, what was this album about?
Another influential album I bought down there at Warehouse Records in El Cajon was the 1976 Kiss Destroyer album. Yeah, that was a good one.
Moving all around, Ramona still was my home base. And when I went to my dad's in Hamul, out of juvenile hall, turns out my mom had sold the house. So I didn't have a place to come back to. That's why I ended up going to his house. Or that's why she probably called him and said, well, I'm living in a condo in Poway. And she sold the house, so it was gone. And then, I don't even know what happened to all the stuff or how I got all my stuff. It's like a mystery to me that right now, out in my garage, I've got boxes with my Matchbox cars from when, I was a kid and buying them up at Western Auto there in Ramona. And then, just all my little books of poetry and stuff. I wasn't carrying that stuff with me. I was up. The only thing I had, I remember I had a really cool road case that I got somehow. That was what I had all my stuff in, and so I had all the albums I bought while I was up in San Francisco, Palo Alto area with visiting Stan. And then when I went to my dad's out of juvenile hall, I remember that's all I had. I don't even know how I got clothes or anything. It's totally weird. Just didn't care, I suppose. And then I remember being at my dad's house in Hamul, and I got a call from Wayne Wilcoxon in the night at Dennis Macon and Jimmy Carver died in a car accident with Teddy Red Oak and John Walters, in the back seat that survived. And I remember being really sad because me and Dennis Macon, had a good friendship there for a year. Same thing when I was still in Ramona living at my house as 15 before I went up to go see Stan. We were always hanging out and listening to Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, and his mom was really cool. I don't remember ever meeting his dad, but he had older brothers. One brother was in the Navy, and they had this little trailer or room, and we would go out, and we actually got to drink. When we were 15, we were drinking beers, from his brother or something, and listening to Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon a lot. We spun that album, just got a lot of plays, and then there was some other, friends involved later on, Steve Allstat. Just really sad, to know that someone that you were friends with, lost their life. And I remember laying in bed, just thinking about my mortality, and his mortality and how, just an eye-opener, In fact, that's one of the songs, Raise Up Your Glass. And there's so many people, to be honest, I can't even number them. I haven't counted of people that died through drunk driving accidents, not only the person themselves, but somebody else hitting them. I remember Kenny got hit by a drunk driver out there on Highway 67 coming into town. And then some suicides. Wow, and then just a lot of people in the time from, high school to maybe say when you're 18 or 19 or 20. And all these deaths that occurred, from a small town like that. And then, so it was really inspiring to me to write a song, about that, because it pulls on the heartstrings, and the idea that, some of us get more time than others is it's a question that remains unanswered. Why do we get more time, and why did someone else not get it? And it causes us to be confused and sometimes angry, but that's just how it is. Life is very unpredictable for us. We can't foresee the future, and when we hit a fork in the road where now things have changed. This person is no longer with us, or even your own family. Like my first thought of death, I was standing in my house at 345 F Street. It was probably, I know I'd been going down to my grandparents' house a couple of years, so it would have been maybe 68, 69. And my grandma had gotten cancer, and I remember we would go and visit her, and it was very short, like she died within a couple of weeks, it seemed like. And I remember talking to her one last time in this kind of like a bed in this place on Coronado Island, where it was like a mini hospital. It wasn't very big, and I remember it just being an older building, but they had these little rooms, and she was in one of them. Talking to her the last time, I can't even really remember what we talked about, except I think she was just telling me what was wrong with her. She said something about, oh yeah, I've got cervical cancer, or something like that. And then next thing I know, I'm back at home, and then the phone rings, and I pick it up, and then my mom picks it up, and it's my grandpa. And so I didn't hang up yet, and he's all, yeah, your mother just passed away this morning, whatever. And then I'm like, well, and I go over and I just hang up the phone real quietly, and I'm looking out the window in our kitchen to the pool, and I'm just tearing up, going like, thinking about that. What does that mean? Someone dies, they're no longer with us. And so that was, my first thought or experience of death and how life ends. I was there in the kitchen of 345 F Street. And then later on, they had a service, and back then it was still, it was an open casket service, and you looked at your grandma laying there. And then I remember my grandpa was really strong all throughout of it, but after the service, when we came out, he just started bawling and everything, and then I started crying, and then my sister was crying, and I remember it was, again, one of those memories where it's not very clear because there's tears in your eyes, and you can remember being on the sidewalk, and that was the first time I think he broke down and cried, the whole time that I'd ever seen him through this whole process. Yeah.
Life doesn't last, it goes by so fast. The youngest ones never got there
This podcast is dedicated to the memory of Dennis Macon.